Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for braving the elements to be with us for this very special conversation. I'm Susan Engel, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Recanati Kaplan 92nd Street Y Talks, or as we like to call it, 92Y Talks. We're so delighted you have joined us with the one and only Ron Agam, who has put together this magnificent exhibit for us all to enjoy. Tonight speaks to the core of who we are as a Jewish cultural and community center. And we will hear from the artist himself on the power of creativity to deepen and communicate Jewish connection and community and behold its capacity to heal the world. Indeed, when we approached Ron Agam to exhibit his work at 92Y, his first reaction was to connect this place with his Jewish roots, and he was very touched. He really feels the Y is a special place, and it reminds him of home. For Ron, he's also a member, a very active member, I might add, of 92Y's Talks Advisory Committee, and the Y holds a very special meaning. It signifies his roots, Jewish expression, and that is why having our very own Rabbi Rubinstein moderate was a perfect choice. To give you a little background about Ron Agam was born in France in 1958. He arrived in the New York scene in the 1980s, and he established himself as a photographer and opened the Art Life Gallery in Soho. In 1994, his debut monograph, At the Wall, garnered wide acclaim for its penetrating photographs of the ultra-Orthodox inhabitants of Mea Shearim and the daily rituals of the Western Wall. One of the photographs, he tells me, attracted the eye of a singer named Madonna and inspired her interest in the Kabbalah. It is amazing, Ron relayed to me, how one photograph can change a life. In 2009, Ron was made a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor of France, and he was also cited for his key role in establishing a relationship of trust and cooperation between France and the Jewish community in America. In 2010, Ron picked up a crayon and began to draw. He has since established a fruitful second act in his artistic career as a painter, as you can see from the extraordinary works of art on these walls. Our moderator, Rabbi Peter Rubinstein, is the Director of Jewish Community at the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life at 92Y. He is also an active member of our 92Y Talks Committee. He is the Rabbi Emeritus of Central Synagogue, where he served as the senior rabbi for 23 years. He co-chairs the Partnership of Faith in New York City, which includes the senior clergy of the city's major congregations, and was co-president of the U.S. board of the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. He presently is also the director of the Be Wise Fellowship in Jewish Entrepreneurialism at HUC-JIR right here in New York City. After their conversation, we will invite your questions, but for now, please join me in giving the warmest 92nd Street Y welcome to Ron Agam and Rabbi Peter Rubinstein.
So let me begin with a confession, not necessarily a Jewish accommodation, but I'm in awe of him, and spent some time at a studio and having a conversation which in some way we could have videoed and just played tonight, and it would have been amazing for all of you. But we're surrounded by the artistry of this man, and I think it's important that we, Ron, start with some of who you are, right, and what brought you to this point. So if one uses the canvas and a work of art as a metaphor, your life has texture and layers and moments of veering. Can you fill us in on some of what brought you from one stage to another, even beginning in your childhood?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. And I want to thank especially my dear friend Tom Kaplan here, who is responsible for me and you to be here together.
Yes.
And thank you for everybody at the Y, of course, also. And, you know, being born in Paris, now that, you know, I'm 60 years old today, so...
Today?
No.
Okay.
But let's put it this way. I'm in a,
okay, you're
in the 6 digits.
Otherwise, I would have sung to you.
I can do that too. You know, sometimes you take things for a fact and you don't really measure the importance of some specific situation in your life. I was born in Paris. My mother and my father were born in Israel. They met in Paris. They lived 6 miles away from each other in Israel, and they met in Paris. And I was born in Paris. So why am I repeating that? It's like to be in the art world or to be anything about spirituality, anything about the space that you inhabit, in a way, gives you certain vibration. For me, as a child, I spent a lot of time with my father in his studio and painting next to him, but that's all. You know, it happened when I was a very young child. Then after that, I left it totally. So what I'm trying to say, I think that retroactively, many, many things that I'm living today are things that the seeds were 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And this is a little bit, what you see today is a little bit of this reaction that took so much time to mature.
So the seeds were planted then, and of course you talk about kind of resonating to the input that you feel, both whether you were in Israel or in Paris. Were there different vibrations coming from those different places as you move from one place to another?
Yeah, of course. Israel is kind of the heart. Paris is more of the cerebral side. And the combination of the two produced my creativity in New York, because in the United States everything is about action. And this action would not maybe have happened if I was in Paris or if I was in Israel. You know, New York for me took me out of my comfort level. Anytime you're in the situation of comfort level, for me it was a disaster. Anytime I took myself out of comfort level, I was able to do interesting things. But yes, New York is about that. I mean, in New York, it's very difficult to exist if you're not in the action. In Paris, you can spend your life in coffee. In Israel, you can spend your life at the beach, and for me, at least. So the feeling was totally different, you know. Israel, for me, a comfort level. Paris is a comfort level. New York is not a comfort level.
Well, we're actually probably feel grateful for your discomfort, but so I want to ask you, so as a childhood, you were painting beside your father, you said, and it took you, and we'll move slowly through it until age 52, I think, until you returned to this form. Yeah. So help us understand, what did you desire to do when you finally said, I have to do something? If it wasn't this, then what was it?
Well, I woke up, I think, at the age of 52 into a world that was forbidden for me before. You know, when you have I lived so many years in the shadow of my father. Everywhere I would go, say, oh, this is the son of Agam, this is the son of Agam. After a while, even though I was doing a lot of very interesting things on the side, for the public, everything, all the image was that I was, you know, affiliated to this. So being in the shadow of somebody so powerful and so magnetic and successful is almost death, you know, to a certain extent. I had to raise myself up from there, and instead of going into something that really be diametrically opposite, Like I went into a suicide mode. I went into the exact same world, painting. Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody, if you go to a psychiatrist and I tell them my story, and then you say to them, I went to the exact same thing, you must be going crazy. Because your chances of even having a little bit of shadow of light is really minuscule. So that struggle that I lived inside was very, very intense, and still intense, because, everything that I work for, everything is about this fear, this disruption inside of me that needs to be unique. But I want to be unique in a field that it was very difficult, because it's the art world, and people judge you most often not for what you do, but for who you are. So it was difficult.
So earlier on, at times that, let's say in one's 20s or 25, mid-20s, when one is trying to decide what to do with one's life, what were your aspirations? If not this, what were your aspirations?
At that time, when I was in my 20s, I was in a few different worlds. I was in the world of business and in the world of art. And that stress, I lived with it a long, long time, because I was looking for an identity. And when you have such a powerful image on top of you and you want to create your own identity, it's a big struggle. It's a big struggle. I mean, you can live an easy life of being this or that, but it was not fun, let's put it this way.
And what role did Judaism play in that? I mean, you obviously, in Israel, you were exposed to it.
Yeah.
I imagine in Paris you were exposed to it in some level. But what role did that have? And what was the history of it in your family? Did you have in your lineage,
yeah, my father's father was a Kabbalist. He was a rabbi, Kabbalist, and very spiritual, trying to dissociate himself from the material world. He was fasting 3 times a week. So my grandmother had to take care of 12 children. It was not the stories I learned from my father they were not too engaging, because the stress of living in Israel at the time was kind of difficult. And on my mother's side, I was.
Did you know your paternal grandparents?
Maybe.
Just a little.
Yeah, but the image was very strong, very austere, very like the picture of a rabbi, like from the shtetls of Europe. That's what I remember.
Wasn't me.
No. No, a lot of austerity. I mean, a lot of austerity. On the other side, from my mother's side, I was direct descendant from the rabbi that created Chabad, Rabbi Schneerson.
Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah, Baal Shem Tov, yeah. So it was, when I was in yeshiva in Paris and I was studying, a rabbi told me that you sometimes, when you are a descendant of a rabbi or something like that, it lasts for 8 generations. You get some sparkles of that genius, or whatever you want to call it. So I said, maybe it's going to be a little bit longer. I'm going to get something out of it, spirituality-wise. But I was always interested by the mystical aspects. My father spent a lot of time talking about Kabbalah. And, there are things that you don't necessarily need to learn, but it's there, it's there in life. When I was, my vocabulary as a child was to look at squares, rectangles, triangles, colors, straight lines, all this. And you don't know, but it's like, it's absorbed. So it was a type of a world that was not literary, and it was totally in the abstract, like Kabbalah.
And was when you talk about forms and shapes, and was architecture ever in?
Yeah, I studied a little bit of architecture. I was fascinated. When I was a child, I wanted to be either a rabbi or an architect.
Okay.
I should have become a rabbi then.
Oh my goodness. Well, yes, we won't go there. But why not architecture? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you go into architecture?
Oof, that was another story. There was a personal thing that happened, but I was in admiration of architecture, and I wanted to build underground cities. Truthfully, I was in my early teens, and I said, if I have to do something, I have to do it the way my father does, which is to create a different world. And my idea was to create underground cities. Nobody lives underground, but I wanted to make people to
So you were already innovating in terms of, I mean, experimenting in terms of how you viewed space. And,
you know, the challenge of living in the environment I lived, I couldn't be normal. Everything was abnormal. The entire evolution of the environment in which I was totally crazy, you know. I witnessed things that, as a child, you absorb them, but you don't necessarily understand them, but they're very strong.
Yeah. Until you look back, and then you can make sense out of them, place them in terms of how it got you here. So, Susan mentioned you had a tremendous career in photography, right? And that must have satisfied part of your soul, right? So then, how did you said at age 52 something happened?
Yeah, I got an offer which no artist or photographer could refuse. I got to commission to do a book with the world's largest luxury company. It's very, very big, from France, with the chairman, to do a book about the subject that they wanted to develop. I said yes, because I was pleased, and it was this and that. And then, 2 months into the project, I said, I'm getting bored and I cannot do it. And I called the chairman, I said, I cannot do it. Now you're calling one of the most powerful people in the world and you say you can't do the project. You know, people tell you you're crazy, you're sick. Everybody told me the same thing. My father, my friends. So I said, something is wrong with me, definitely.
So you were wrestling with something then, at that point.
Yeah, I was kind of in front of a wall. I was reaching my 50. I've done a lot of things. Some of them successful, some of them semi-successful, some of them a failure. It was like unbalanced. So suddenly I get this offer and I say no to it. Everybody told me you're crazy. So I fell into a very deep depression, like deep depression. And that's where that's where things that are over here can come up and transform. So I think without that crisis, I wouldn't be here talking to you about art, because I would be in a comfort level. I would probably be a photographer or something else. But that crisis hit me at an age where things usually don't happen at that age, you know.
So that was a moment of veering. I mean, that kind of uprising within you, right? Yeah. Kind of propelled you forward to try things you had never done.
Yeah, to go into the unknown.
And uncomfortable.
To go into the unknown. You know, for me, to go into the world of painting with the challenges that it represents in a normal situation was a big no-no. First of all, I thought I had zero talent. All my life, whenever I was looking at people with a brush or with a pencil and they were drawing or doing art, I admired them because I knew that I had zero talent. For me, I could click on a camera and make nice composition, but to do that, no way, because I had no talent. That's what I put in my head. So when I started to draw like a little child, it took me weeks and months of building some assurance that maybe I was into something, you know, maybe. But I was living in fear, you know.
And I mean, I'm fascinated by this. I'm wondering how much your father was playing in the background in terms of what you perceived as talent and success in painting, and you're needing to find a way, because there was a vacuum ahead when you went into that depression, and you decided to, you know, to do something, to take a chance on something.
I was an idiot, you know. No, I'm saying to you, to go into something so powerful, so strong, knowing what you have around you and how people are going to judge you, you must be insane, you know. so I was insane, obviously, and that insanity produced this thing. But this is where things that are not logic become logical, maybe deep
along the way.
In a way that things that you don't understand that happening in you, but they're happening. And you know, I told you that story with that rabbi. When I was in school, I was lifting my hands every other minute to ask questions, so the rabbi couldn't, the teacher couldn't even finish his sentence. I was raising my. He got so fed up with me. He called me to the front of the room, in front of all the students. He said, "Ron, you know, I'm going to teach you a lesson. Stop asking questions all the time." So I look at him. I was humiliated in front of the entire class, you know. And the rabbi said to me, "Did you ever hear about Ta'aseh v'tishma?" Ta'aseh v'tishma was first do something, and then you'll understand why you're doing. So the power of action was so strong, and this is something that followed me all my life. I was doing things, sometimes I didn't understand why I was doing that, but then the power of intuition, I grabbed onto that power, and it lifted me to areas where, you know, it was an adventure.
So when you struck out on that you know, at age 52, and that vacuum that, you know, you're going to just do it and not necessarily understand it, what was the first thing that you did? I mean, what was the first thing you painted? What was the first time that you said, I can do this?
I needed references, because in art, you don't come out of nowhere, you know. And I had admired an artist by the name of Joseph Albers. Albers' fame came late in his life, actually, in his 60s, I think. He is the artist that created bands of squares, 3 squares in different colors. And as a child, I admired that. And one of my father's dealers for my bar mitzvah asked me, "What do you want?" So I said, "I want an Albers." So she gave me an Albers, a beautiful Albers, at the age of 13. And my father looked at me, I remember, said, "Albers?" Anyhow, so that stripe, these 3 bands, I said, something over there is something that I feel you know, connected to. And I started to do painting in stripes of 3 with very bright colors that you saw. Right. And then I applied, you know, some kind of material on that, and it was unique. And you know, for an artist to try to find something which is unique, it's already a good thing, because you don't want to do something that somebody else did. So I started to work on these paintings, and slowly I started to get a little bit of assurance, you know. And one day somebody came and he said, "I want to do a show for you." Yeah.
So you talked about the Jewish strain in your life. I mean, that thread, that stream that came down through the generations, through your parents and to you. And I think we all have to take note that the Magen David in the back here is really the cover image for this exhibit.
Yeah.
Tell us a story.
You know, you're all familiar with what happened in Pittsburgh a few months ago with the massacre. So the day after the massacre, I had prepared, you know, this star, but it was basically just the wood panel that was there. And I started to paint it. And while I was painting it, this tragedy of Pittsburgh, like, I was in shock, you know, like everybody else was in shock. And I said, I need to do something. And I was working on that, you know, on that painting. And I started to apply colors. I did a lot of stars in my life, a lot. I did some. But I've never done something, you know, with that series of colors the way it is. And I worked on that piece, you know, for a week. When it was finished, I hanged it, you know, on my wall, and I realized what I was doing. The message that came in was, how is a Jewish child looking at his future to a Jewish symbol, and how can I give him comfort? How can I use colors to give him a sense of optimism about who he is and where he's going? And that's why these colors, you know, that I chose are totally out of the, you know, the scheme of colors that you'll ever see, you know, a star.
Yeah, it's kind of iconoclastic to see a Magen, Star of David, without it being blue and white, right? So in fact, there's a shock value as one looks at that. I mean, a happy shock value,
Yeah.
but not necessarily what one would expect. And I imagine...
You see, even the yellow for me was the Holocaust. But you see, it's in the middle of some other colors that are totally in the opposite of anything bleak and dark. This pink, you know. So I wanted to exude an energy and a vision of something that a child would look at it and say, oh, I'm comfortable with it. And the child usually doesn't express, you know, verbally, but he could understand when he looked at the piece. When you look at the piece, you can have a sense of comfort and hope to these colors.
I'm not going to ask you about the meaning of every other color, but
Yeah.
I noticed that the center star is very light, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like an open space.
Yeah.
Was that intentional?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I'm sure it was intentional, but
Yeah.
how do you explain that?
You know, I'm haunted by a lot of the things that are happening today. What you see, I mean, you touch a very delicate subject, and I'm going to talk about it. I'm very active in a lot of Jewish politics and, you know, Jewish survival and issues of that matter. And I've spent a lot of time in my life to try to bring people together from all communities. And what we are living today in terms of anti-Semitism, in terms of a lot of things that are affecting, you know, the delicate situation in which, you know, the entire human race is, but in particular, my background, it's not a coincidence that you see this color, because it's all come from there. It's not something, it's something unconscious, and the ends of the artist acting on something that comes from here that not necessarily can be explained immediately, but if it's there, it's because I live it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, first I find this all fascinating because there are very few people I know that have this intersection between art and politics, or, you know, have a mission. They don't think of their art as a mission, but I think you do think of your art as a mission. How would you describe that mission?
Well, for me, the most important priority is to take people out, to take in general. When you look at a lot of my works, I'm hoping that people are somehow elevated to something different than the mundane. I want them to almost travel to a different visual experience, and an experience that makes them think differently. And obviously, some of the colors that you see are colors that should elevate you and inspire you for things that will push you to go to a space of hope. You know, I don't use, you rarely see me using very dark colors, contrast, you know, of black and blues and stuff like that. I'm in a period of my life where I want to infuse hope. So to many of these works here have this intensity.
You know, I see there's so many of you, what you have here have structural components, squares and rectangles and circles, and yet they're all surprising, right? In other words, you take something, common forms that we see all the time. I'm thinking of, you know, the piece in the back, and there's something you can't help but be surprised by it. As a matter of fact, you turn your head, you try to see it differently. Do you see your two-dimensional works as having a three-dimensional quality?
Yeah. I mean, everything that I do is about experience and experiment. You know, I try not to repeat what I do constantly. That's why here it's only a few different types of works. But, you know, I was talking to my friend Tom before, and I looked at this painting there. I said, "You see, Tom, these are square. This is something which is very stable. It's square, like the most stable form of geometry. Like, it's not moving. You know, it's not a circle. It's not a triangle. It's solid attachment to reality. And one of my concepts, which really I integrated very much into my work, is the concept of disruption. Disruption is a word that we can live every second today. Everything is being disrupted in every field, from science to politics to anything that you want. The word disruption will come together. So in that painting here, I'm trying to express that feeling of disruption, obviously in a joyful way, because I mean the colors I'm using are not cynical or, you know, they're all about inspiring something that's positive disruption, let's put it this way. But yeah, so there's a lot of my works that are going into this field of disruption.
So, and you use the word experimentation. I mean, experimentation in a certain way is something deliberate. It's not, in some ways by accident you fall upon something, but to experiment means you're setting out to do something different.
Yeah.
What's on the horizon for you? What's on the horizon, and what are you working with now? What are you experimenting with now?
A multitude of things. I mean, I showed you something, but don't
I'm not going to say a word.
Don't say. But you've seen something which is definitely, when it's going to be, yeah, when it's going to be shown in public, people are going to be like crazy about it. But
I'm crazy about it.
Yeah, but don't say
That's
anything.
all I'm going to say.
Don't say
I'm
anything.
crazy about
Don't say anything. But this is the way I'm going to, trying to bridge, you know, my imagination with tools of technology that could also, you know, make some sort of friction that will be a sparkle for something interesting. Yeah.
When you talk about technology, very often people immediately go to computers. How much is, you know, that world of computers helpful in your art? And
Oh, tremendous. Tremendous. I mean, I'm blessed to have been a photographer because before I became a painter, because I was able to work with pixels like people will be working, you know, with a brush or something. So that aspect of working with computers was very helpful to me when I started developing my world of images. And I tell you something, when my father was doing a drawing, sometimes it would take him 2-3 months to finish a drawing that I can do in an hour today, you know. And the idea is there, you know, the execution is another story. But what's most important is the concept, the idea, the execution, you know. All the painters of the Renaissance, they had all assistants and they were, you know, working with assistants. But the germ, the idea is, the computer was very helpful.
Do you talk to your father, or do your father talk to you about your art in terms of, does he ever express opinions about it? You don't need to answer that.
He talks to me a lot about his art.
About his art.
Yeah.
Which is his right, I guess.
You know, when you are 90 years old and you have the life that he had, you don't want to die.
Yeah.
And when your son is going into the same field, maybe something is disturbing there. And I can understand that. Because
very disruptive. Yeah,
disruptive. So, I mean, we have a very fascinating relationship on a lot of love and respect. Mm-hmm. And we'll see where it goes, you know. Somebody, a very important art dealer, called me the other day and said to me, I want to do a show with you and your father. He doesn't know about it. It's going to be called Agam and Agam. You know, who knows if it's ever going to be happening. But you asked me a question, so I'm being candid with you.
So,
as long as it doesn't get out of
this is a cone of confidentiality. No one's going to tell anybody.
Discreet.
Yeah, discreet. So I was introduced to a word tonight that I'd never heard before, perhaps because of my innocence in the art world, lenticular. Yeah. What exactly is that? I mean, it's extraordinary. We have two right in front of us. Tell us about that and how it happens, and what is the technique, and what do you try to accomplish with it?
Yeah, well, you see, about 40 years ago, my father started, you know, with creating images that were flips of different images, and it was dynamic, and he worked on that field of lenticular images. And it was a huge success worldwide for him and everything for many, many years. And one day I had the opportunity to meet somebody that told me, oh, you know, I can work with you in creating images and things that will be really, really different. I said, you're full of. So I said, okay, let's start do something. And this thing became like a volcano. That was 1 year when I started, you know, to paint. And it was an explosion. I created 200 different images of this type of work, which is, you see the depth, the change and the depth. And this was like an expansion of what my father did 40 years ago in a different field. But, you know, it's like, he can be a writer, but I also can be a writer. We use the same, you know, technique, but we do different things. The content is different. So in my aspect, it was just something I touched, and while I started developing this, it was just a volcano of creativity.
You brought a photograph, and a small one, placed on the table back there.
Yeah.
Why did you bring it, and how did you do it, and what does that mean?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's my studio. So I wanted people to see how I work and where I live. Where I live. I don't live there, but I spend all my life there, so I live there. So it's the integration of the three-dimensional aspect, because everything that we see most of the time, we see it in two-dimensional representation. And that type of development is into anything that I was doing before, because it was a mix before with photography and also, you know, with the works that you're seeing on the wall, which are totally abstract.
So as much as
experimentation.
As much as I would love to have you give a gallery tour tonight, if you were to pick one other of your works here that means something that you'd like to talk about and teach us from, what might it be? I know it's hard to pick one, but just pick any one and tell us what that represents for you.
You know, I told you about the disruption of this particular big piece in the back. This concept of disruption is something that I've been working on, you know, a long time. Now, these different mediums in all of the works that you see, there's paintings, there is graphic work, which is on lenticular medium, and here you have works on paper. So for me, I need, you know, I work when you come to my studio, so it's pretty big, but I also work on many different things at the same time. And this interreaction between different mediums and different types of works is something that is very challenging, because I can jump from this to this to this to that, but I never lose sense of where I am, you know. It's like a total connectivity, you know, with ear and ear. So to go and to explain to you about one particular piece, I would prefer to explain to you about the way I work, which is experience and experimentation, because I like to touch many things, you know. And this is like I told you before, when we talk about it, I feel like I'm a kid. You know, I feel like I constantly need to, some people would say it's playing, but for me it's really working, playing. And that little, you know, energy of surprise that I can maybe get a few times a day, you know, it's like the most profound feeling of existence that I can have. So totally playing, experimenting, doing things, you know, destroying, repairing. That kinetic energy, in a way, is what makes me to be who I am.
So I'm going to ask you a totally unfair question, and then we'll engage, hopefully, all of you in conversation. I can look at you, and Tom and others who know you look at you, and we could talk about you and use the superlative words, but if you were to look at yourself and try to talk about the spiritual aspect of yourself, what would you say is spurring you on?
You know, I live in the fear of failure all day long, of disappointing, and if I try to analyze myself, is the fact that I'm really, it's not that I'm insecure in who I am. I feel, I live the best time of my life today, which is to be a creator and to create as much as I can create. And I know that this type of element, that type of situation is not, maybe it's not going to last too long. Who knows, A few years ago, I was on my deathbed, I told you. This wonderful doctor here, Dr. Rayfield, saved me. Yeah? Mm. And
thank God.
And it's a gift, And how long you're going to keep it, I don't know. But that's why I constantly work. I told you I work 16, 18 hours a day. It's insanity, But I really do live in fear. I live in fear of losing what I have. What I have is not the material side. It's what I have in terms of the ability to continue to create. And this is like, it's a gift, and that's also something I want to talk to you about before. I was mentioning that, I'm a perfect example of somebody that didn't have much trust in himself about what I was capable of doing. I was like, there was a mountain on top of my head. There was a lot of shadows and everything. And for me, it took me a long time to really explore what I had, what was the real me. And the real me took me a long time to pull it out. So I'm saying, if I did it, I think everybody else can do it. I mean, we all have a huge reservoir of possibilities, and we just need to break it out and go out of our comfort zone to even try a little bit, because you never know. I tried a little bit, and it went far. And that's why, my message, in a way, is that we really have to believe in ourselves and give the possibilities for children, for people, for anyone, to believe in themselves so that they can create and do something unique. This is my belief.
Well, it's a great message. I would just say, I think for me, and I hope for everybody here tonight, you're a gift. And I just want to thank you for being here. And let us open up for questions, conversation, and so on. Yes, sir. I may repeat it so that...
The pieces that you present here today, what I find most incredible are the ones that have the 3 dimensions to them. And this piece in particular is unbelievable.
He's pointing to this piece over here. Yeah.
The large piece there, this one, and the three small ones in the back. I'm interested in how you do that, whether it's a question of layers that you put that create that 3 dimension. Did your father do this kind of painting? And have you ever had any communication with Victor Vasarely? He's the first one that I've seen with this type of painting, and it's initially what I thought of when I saw these, but yours are just incredible, and I'd love to have one of them. I'll take even one of the little ones in the back. These are
just you could talk to Allison about it.
But this one in particular, it almost reminds me of Alice in Wonderland, when she fell into that hole. This one over here, and it just goes on and on and on.
My best work, I do it 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, when it's total darkness. But there's an evolution. When you bridge technology with an artist could be me, could be anybody else. In my case, it was me, and with my background, I was able to do what you're seeing. And also because, I was pretty good in computers. Pretty good, with... Yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't be able to do any of these works if it was done in an analog way. No way. And when you touch issues of layers, some of these works have 100 layers, 80 layers. It's very meticulous. And the way I compose the image takes me a lot of time. And if you ask about... No, my father was doing something totally different. My father was a composition of 3 different images that move and create what you call a dynamic effect. He was not going into the depth, into the 3D element.
Right.
He does now.
If you would consider this the highest compliment, looking at your pieces, no matter where you go, they continue to look at you. And it reminds me of the Mona Lisa, that no matter where you look, she always follows you.
I tell you something about the Mona Lisa. When I was a little child, My mother was crazy about Italy, so we'll go and drive to Firenze every couple of months. So I was looking at the galleries there and looking at the art, and it was absolutely fantastic. About 4 years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, I inaugurated a work at the French embassy, a flag that I did for France in 3 dimensions. And it's France, it's a big place. They have all the artists in the world. And they asked me to do this painting, which is relating to a flag. I put cubes of different colors to express the diversity and wealth of French culture. The opening of the party, to the inauguration of the painting on the thing, there was a lot of people, and I had to give a speech. In 2 words, I related to that story. When I was a child, I was in Firenze, and I was looking at all these things. And today, I'm installing a painting in the French embassy, and next to me, there's a little unknown artist from Italy called Michelangelo. So there was a Agam painting next to Michelangelo. And for me, that's the child dream, like totally crazy.
Not totally crazy, but beautifully said. Other questions or comments, thoughts? Allison, anything? Yes, please.
Do you ever venture into drawing in human forms, or do you stick with shapes?
If I can, or I venture in drawing human form. As a photographer, I did it so many times. So you cannot do better than that. I was pretty good at doing, these portraits and things like this. So I would stick, if I need to represent a human being, I will go to the camera and work with the camera. And I love cameras. So I try not to go, but it's a different world. Yeah. But maybe, who knows?
There's a, yes.
You once told that fabulous story about a photography exhibit that you had that was so powerful. I'm trying to remember it, and I thought if I would spark a memory of that.
About photography exhibit?
You did a photography exhibit.
I did a few, so, and some of them are pretty memorable, but I don't remember in which context it was. If you remind me, I would.
So Ron I think Allison agreed to stay on, have a reception afterwards. And is there anything else I need to announce before we conclude?
If you join us after, we do a poster signing with posters for all of you. So Ron will be back, and just thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
So you will all receive a gift besides what I believe, for me personally, has been a tremendous gift listening to you, Ron, and knowing you. And I just think that we were all...
You know what, I tried, it was very important for me to be candid and to be truthful and not to spread any BS stories or anything to make me look bigger or smaller or this. And I really wanted to talk from the heart. That was important for me because, how many times in our lives can we really be so direct and express what we really live through? So that was part of my communication with you today.
And from my heart to yours, your heart is immense. Your artistry is extraordinary. And as a human being, I find you to be among the most decent people I think I've met. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you.